screens. This is Dr. Muhammad Mushtaba Asad from Sakkarabi University, Pakistan. Today, I am sharing my keynote talk on the topic of collaborative tools for the educators. As we know that collaboration is one of the major and effective skill and for the competent educator of 21st century. This is also the learner's skill where we can develop the teamwork, leadership, problem solving and decision making skills and capabilities among our learners and the students. As pedagogues, nowadays, as we had experienced during the situation of pandemic, that mostly our teaching and learning was shifted to the online platforms. Previously, there was also the development in terms of collaborative platforms, digital platforms, online platforms for the educators and the students. But after the pandemic, COVID-19, there is a huge development in terms of software industry to develop and enhance such skills, and the delivery process becomes smooth through inclusion of such tools where we can collaborate with our students, we can collaborate with our teachers, and then can deliver the knowledge in an effective manner. Similarly, when we talk about collaborative learning tools, either it is specifically limited for the students where they can collaborate with each other and they can foster the learning process by accessing to some resources provided by the educators. Similarly, there are dedicated tools which are for the collaboration of the teachers. They can share their best practices in terms of their curriculum development, in terms of their digital coursework design, in terms of their instructional design, and they can share their best and good practices with the international partners, with the international educators in a very organized and effectual manner. As we know, when we talk about the literacy and the skill of educator, because if the teacher having all the skills which are required to drive or to interact with the technology and further move or go on with the technological development and integrate that in their teaching and learning process. There are several tools which are available online. Based on their usage, based on their functionality, configuration, specs, the teachers, either they are teaching science subjects, engineering subjects, or either they are teaching the social sciences subjects. So based on their need and requirement, they can adapt those tools and they modify according to their needs, develop their classes, create the quizzes, conduct the polls, conduct the assignment submission slots, discussion slots, interact with the students, provide them some kind of assessment strategies in terms of assessment in formative or summative assessment. They can develop such activities for the students where they can engage them in a collaborative manner. If we talk about some applications like learning management systems, most of the institution, either in the school level, in higher education level, they are using some learning management systems, and where the learning management systems are tailored according to the need and demand of the particular institution. Similarly, we have a Mentimeter. This is one of the famous tool for the collaborative learning, where we can develop the presentations, we can interact with the students, we can interact with the teachers, we can develop the quizzes, we can also work and strengthen our practices by sharing our resources within our circle, within our the limited access boundaries. And also we have some open source applications are also available, such as Edmodo. Edmodo is also providing us a very good graphical user interface. The interface is like a Facebook, social media platforms, where we can also interact with the teachers as well as the students and their parents. So there is a good practices, good innovations, new development in the technological domain, in the pedagogical domain. We can get all the new information and resources. Similarly, we have EasyClass. EasyClass is also one of the platform where we can create our classes. We can also engage our students In a group, we can develop or divide them into groups, and we can assign them certain activities within their peers, and they can complete their work and share with the teachers. Similarly, we have other applications which are under the learning management system, where the teacher can easily connect with the students in the situation of this pandemic. Collaboration is not just limited within few groups. We can also collaborate on the administrative level. The school head, the institutional heads can also learn, and they can share their practices and learn new practices by interacting to the collaborative tools and collaborative interaction and learning tools. And based on this demand, based on this need, still we have to work for further strengthening or further developing such dedicated and such tailored tools which can be used specifically for the specific nature of the requirement within our teaching and learning activities or teaching and learning domain. As we know that when the educator or when the teacher possess this kind of skill, he or she can interact with the students, he or she can interact with the international audience in a very good and effective manner, and he or she can improve or enhance the delivery process. The innovation, as there is innovation in technology, there are also development and there is also progress in the approaches, in such methodological approaches where we can teach our students and we can train our educators. Here, the stakeholders can play a very important role. They can provide the infrastructure to the teachers. They can provide all the trainings to the teachers, where they can professionally learn such skill from the professional focal person or the person who can provide them all such skills or can deliver the skills in effective manner, while they can bring those collaborative tools or collaborative material, and they can interact with the students in a very organized manner. Universities, colleges, schools need to promote such culture, because when we talk about 4 C's, the 4 C's which are very important and essential for the educators, then the C for communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and critical thinking, and then the collaboration part is more dominant, because here our critical thinking domains are also the higher order thinking skills and higher order thinking domains are also very much required, such as problem solving, decision making, and brainstorming, and specifically when we talk about such tools which can help us to develop some kind of collaboration with the students, then it can help the teachers and students to learn in this particular situation when they are not easily access the campus, they cannot easily access to the resources. Then in that manner, teacher can share all the resources and the material with the students through such collaborative learning tool platforms. So it is one of the very essential and very required kind of skill which we have to, as educators, as a leader of the institution, as a member of the decision making, educational decision making communities and committees, we need to emphasize on this development. We need to work and we need to emphasize that we have to provide such skills to the educators, those tools, infrastructure to the educators that can help us to develop such skills. So thank you very much. That was my short keynote talk with all of you. I hope that we will have in coming sessions, we will also best wishes for all of you, and thank you very much for the invitation.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity for me to present my research. I'm sorry that I cannot join this conference live, that I'll just record this presentation and share with you. So I look forward to your comments and feedback after this presentation. So my presentation today is monolingual language policy and multilingual practice and identity, translangaging in ELT. So I'll start this presentation from the background information of the development of global Englishes and translangaging. I think as English language educators, we recognize ELT in transition. And after some background information, I'll share with you this empirical study I conducted with one of my students, and will propose some future directions of English language teaching. So we look at English as a global language for intercultural communication, that English is one of the languages used across the globe, while the complexity of this language, as we notice that the number of non-native speakers of English, okay, is higher than its native speakers of English. So the complexity of the use of English, we also need to recognize inter and intra-cultural communication is also a meaningful exchange between members of the same social group or of groups with similar cultural priorities. So the use of English, we will see that it's not only in international, intercultural communication, but also within the context as a property for intra-cultural communication. And some of the previous language ideologies, such as world Englishes, as lingual English, as a lingua franca, and also we need to recognize lots of post-colonial varieties of English, and also English is used in the expanding circle contexts, right? The complexity of language context. So what is the role of English in higher education? And recently people are researching English medium education, mother tongue instruction, English for employment opportunities, English as gatekeeping, and also whether English is the shared code in higher education nationalization, whether the dominance of English will lead to linguistic discrimination, etc., etc. So here, that's traditional monolingual ELT is argued that to go into a trap of native speakerism, which is a pervasive ideology within ELT, categorized by the belief that native speaker teachers represent a Western culture from which spring the ideals both of the English language and of English language teaching methodology. And the native speakerism is seen instead as a divisive force which originates within particular educational cultures within the English-speaking West. So here, Kumar argued that by their uncritical acceptance of the native speaker dominance, non-native professionals legitimize their own marginalization, both the process of marginalization and the practice of self-marginalization bring to the fore the coloniality rather than the globality of the English language. They cast a long hegemonic shadow over the activity of TESOL. That's why scholars, we recognize that TESOL is in transition. So how do we promote multilingual education? How do we recognize mother tongue, the role of the linguistic people's linguistic repertoire in education? Right. And this also goes to the representation of culture in textbooks. Again, the argument from Kumaravati Value is that the TESOL profession cannot remain oblivious to the fact that globalization has resulted in greater contrasts contacts between people of different cultures, leading to a better awareness of each other's values and visions, and to a firmer resolve to preserve and protect one's cultural liberty. And also, we recognize linguistic awareness, linguistic liberty as well. Okay, the people's complex multilingual linguistic repertoire as well. So not only policymakers, but also textbook preparation and production remain a centrally controlled, globally targeted activity with very little role for local ELT professionals. So today, in many ELT contexts, practices, the tension between retaining the culture and values associated with the mother tongue and the adoption of a national identity symbolized by a foreign language is not easy to reconcile. That goes to the proposal of global Englishes. So global Englishes is an umbrella term that incorporates concepts of world Englishes, English as a lingua franca, and English as an international language. Some scholars would include translanguaging into this paradigm, but translanguaging is also a practical theory of language content, of language use, right? So some would argue that translanguaging would stand on its own. So today's presentation I just separates, but they are both, connected with each other. So I think we don't really separate translanguaging from global Englishes, but we also need to recognize that translanguaging should also stand on its own, right? So here, global Englishes extends the lens of world Englishes, ELF, and EIL to incorporate many peripheral issues associated with the global use of English, such as globalization, linguistic imperialism, linguistic racism, education, language policy, and planning. So here we do not really look at the English use in the so-called center, but also the peripheral use of English. The complexity dynamic use of English should also be recognized. So the new phase of English is that English is a multilingual franca from the paradigm of multilingualism. So we need to recognize the multilingual turn in applied linguistics and also the new demographic trend, the ratio of native speakers versus non-native speakers, and the complexity and super diversity of language contact. We've got lots of proposals such as translanguaging, translingualism, metro-linguistics, etc. So a quick summary of global English is that this is a paradigm shift in research, teaching, and recognition of the current linguistic landscape and the socio-linguistic functions of English. And this is also a shift from monolingual framework to multilingual, multicultural framework and theories of English use and also language use in general. So when we recognize multilingual, multicultural, and multimodality in language use, language contact. So here goes translanguaging, started from language from a more fixed sense to languaging from a more dynamic perspective to translanguaging with various linguistic, semiotic, multimodal resources in communication. So it's a cognitive, psychological, social, linguistic, practical theory of language. So translanguaging focuses on communication, right? Effective communication, not from the perspective of language itself, right? So it has been adopted to describe bilingual, multilingual speakers' complex language practices, multiple discursive practices in which bilinguals engage in order to make sense of their bilingual worlds. And translanguaging also embraces code switching, first language use, multimodal, and further transsemiotic practices. So starting from monolingualism, that's from a more fixed standard of language use, to multilingualism, that language in contact to create new meanings. So here from the perspective of translanguaging, language itself should no longer be viewed as codes, right? So we focus more on the negotiation, the use of linguistic cultural repertoire, semiotic resources in communication. So here the perspective of language or languaging, translanguaging also challenges the concept of named languages and revisits the traditional hierarchy and superiority of the Anglophone varieties of English. So from the perspective of translanguaging, if we take the argument from Kumaravati value, so here, English language teaching should recognize the locality rather than simply reinforcing the ideology of coloniality. So here, translanguaging, scholars of translanguaging also promote a decolonizing pedagogy in ELT. But still, if we look at some of the mainstream ELT practices, the fact is that despite the initiative arguing for the importance of incorporating various aspects of global Englishes and translanguaging as well, actual ELT practices seem to be relatively slow to reflect on global Englishes. The entrenched ideology of native speakerism is still salient in both job markets and classroom practices. So we will see this, the top-down policy, right? And also the social market. So the gap is that ELT would generate a false image between the local and the global and create an invisible hierarchy between the center and the periphery. So English is still perceived as the property of its native speakers. While translanguaging, as I mentioned, we need to look at classroom discourse from the pedagogical translanguaging perspective. Will further resonate with the implementation of translanguaging in various contexts to understand various issues of language related to identity, power, and inequality viewed through a sociolinguistic lens. So here, translanguaging pedagogy could provide a more comprehensive picture of classroom discourse practice to examine how stakeholders deal with the tension between the rigid English-only policy and the students' practical language needs in classroom practices. So I'm going to introduce a study like I conducted with my students when we researched translanguaging for classroom discourse. If you are interested in, you can read this publication on Lingua, the journal Lingua. So here we had two research questions. The first one was, what kinds of translanguaging practices have been adopted by both teachers and students at the Chinese university in the study? And the second one was the what are students' attitudes towards translanguaging practices at this Chinese university? Okay, three. Okay, the third one is what are teachers' attitude towards and the reasons for translanguaging practices at this Chinese university? So here the background, the profile of the teachers, that they were both language teachers and also content teachers. And we found the teachers' translanguaging practices. We summarized and categorized the practices. So the first one is concept, language point explanation, comprehension check, content knowledge localization, instruction reinforcement, and creation of class rapport. So here the first example is the use of translanguaging for concept, language point explanation. So here the teachers use the images and also explanations on the whiteboards to explain. And here the teachers make the teacher also make use of first language to explain this concept, the language point. So here the teacher was introducing cause and effects. So to clarify the differences, the teacher used the students' shared first language to facilitate the expected her students to identify the corresponding word in English to check the students' understanding of key concepts and to help them develop bilingual literacy. Translanguaging for content knowledge, this is the local use of the term of a legal principle. Here, two legal principles that is very difficult to translate. So the teacher just used translanguaging for content knowledge, explanation, localized concept for understanding. And also translanguaging was used for instruction reinforcement, right? So the teacher just mentioned 3 minutes, hand in your work in 3 minutes in Chinese, right? To reinforce as a instruction reinforcement. She highlighted and strengthened her instructions. And the translanguaging was also used to create class rapport. So the teacher just used a joke as a metaphor, a local metaphor, right, to create class rapport for her student. Well, if we also look at students' attitudes towards translanguaging, from this questionnaire, students really perceive quite positive attitudes towards translanguaging with various, with also the acceptance level. So it's overall is mid-average to acceptance level. So the students hold a neutral to positive attitude towards translanguaging. Multilingual students generally accept it as a natural and appropriate practice that improves their confidence and facilitates their second language learning. So among different translanguaging use situations, the students agree most on two teachers, I think, yeah, T1 and T2, that they use translanguaging. For example, first language is used for highlighting a point, and also to inject humor, and also to bring closer relationship between teachers and students. While another groups of teachers, they hold this maximal and virtual position that this teacher mentioned, that the PowerPoints, presentations, and lectures are required to be in English only. And also this teacher mentioned about the English only policy. And another teacher mentioned that we have a principle in class of using English only. This is an unspoken rule. So some teachers feel quite reluctant of to implement translanguaging, whether it's pedagogical translanguaging, whether this is spontaneous translanguaging, right? So we've got different attitudes from the teachers. So a quick summary is that despite the English-only policy, the teacher participants utilize translanguaging strategies to facilitate content teaching, including concept language point explanation, comprehension check, and content knowledge localization. While the teachers show different positions towards translanguaging, right? Some in favor of translanguaging recognize more functions of translanguaging practices. Well, also we need to recognize that translanguaging should not be imposed. Some challenges as well. that the influence of the monolingual policy and students' overuse of first language. So some food for thought. The global Englishes and translangaging does not promote non-standard English or anything goes. So again, this is the strategy, that is the awareness should be negotiated, should be discussed between teachers and students as well as policymakers, right? So it does not really abandon accuracy. Well, accuracy should also be contextualized. I think this is also very important. That's global Englishes and translangaging that view the mutual intelligibility through meaning negotiation as a priority of communication. And again, it's not to be imposed, as I mentioned, right? So it's a choice, it's an option to prepare people's future needs. Assessment for with global Englishes and translangaging is still a big challenge, given the large number of English language learners around the world. So again, those need to be contextualized. So the bias in linguistic innovation and change, that English and European languages, the English and European bias, one language at a time, that's the monolingual bias. Language in its convention and narrowly defined sense of speech and writing, and not other modalities. This is the lingual bias. So still we, as English language or language educators, we are facing various challenges, right, and biases. And also ELT in transition. So how do we focus on multilingualism to promote multilingual education? It's not to get rid of, but to focus on different needs of the students, right? To promote multilingual education and to look at English and other speakers, other language resources as the whole linguistic repertoire. And not only we look at ELT from the decontextualized classrooms, but also to look at the social contexts. Right. So although the role of English is undoubtedly prominent in students' future employment and career development, it does not mean that mastery of English only would naturally lead to optimal outcomes in terms of content subject learning and enhancement of English language proficiency. So as language teachers, they are advised to learn more about the new trend in bilingual, multilingual education to broaden students' perceptions and accept a multilingual view, both students and teachers. And also translangaging, again, transcending boundaries between named languages, and also what has been traditionally regarded as linguistic and other linguistic, cognitive and semiotic means. So to help teachers overcome monolingual lingual biases. So how can teachers develop a multilingual lens? The first one, to reconsider the monolingual bias, adopt a sociolinguistic perspective, respect linguistic and cultural resources, and also recognize students' first languages as the resource and allow translangaging as a natural linguistic practice. So here, very powerful is the adoption of global Englishes and translangaging for an anti-racist pedagogy or decolonizing pedagogy. So it's the address the intertwined nature of race and language teaching, support both students and teachers in recognizing and making visible the racialized nature of language. So the study of world Englishes, global Englishes, translangaging, share multilingual ideologies and can enrich each other so as to contribute to the developing of multilingualism in education elsewhere. So the development of synergies between the two areas will certainly strengthen the expansion of multilingual ideologies. So this is the presentation. That's thank you very much for coming, for joining this section. So again, just hope that this idea, global Englishes and translangaging should be implemented, should be recognized. And I think we all need this anti-racist pedagogy. We all need this decolonizing pedagogy to promote linguistic inclusiveness fairness and linguistic equity in language education and learning. Thank you very much, and that is from me. That is my presentation. Okay.